Now first we're going to compare the money that was on the top shelf in the safe, which is the hottest shelf in the safe when it goes through a fire. Notice the money here, this bundle, even the seal here stayed intact. This was money that was in the firebox. This top bill was exposed to the smoke and the steam more so than the other bills. Remember, this pack was just laying on the material on the top shelf. Compare the bottom side of this bundle that was laying simply on the material compared to the bill here, which was in the firebox. Now, had this been a sheetrock line safe here, this money would have most likely burned to toast. It would have been simply ash. Notice how well that simply the money band excuse me, has protected the bill. This money would have still been spendable. Now the top bill, after 2 weeks, it's beginning to crumble slightly, but still would have been spendable. Here we have the American Express Traveler's checks. The two on the outsides here, these were in the firebox. The ones in the middle here, and this was the pack they were in, they were simply laying on the top shelf. You can tell where the steam and the smoke touched the paper. Even though this paper survived, it has the smoke damage. Notice the back side, no smoke damage. Now this is very important. This was brass ammunition, which did not cook off during this fire. Remember, the fire burned at over 2,000 degrees for approximately 25 to 30 minutes. Had this been a sheetrock line safe, this ammunition would have cooked off. It's been my experience in 25 years. I tell the customers, if you hear the brass ammunition cook off inside of your safe while the house is burning, then there's going to be nothing left in the safe. That is with a sheetrock line safe. The difference here is we're talking about a concrete line safe, which even in the event of worst case scenario, we've reduced our damage as much as possible. Note that this paper would represented a box that ammo would have come in. Key here is the ammunition on the top shelf, the hottest shelf in the safe, did not cook off. Now this cheap handgun is an excellent example of what we normally see after a fire, most common house fires. This, you'll see that the bluing on the slide here actually looks fairly good, but this is the point where the bluing was in touch or contact with the material on the top shelf, the hottest shelf in the fire. The bluing is completely gone off of this cheaper frame. Notice this, that when I turn this over, this was the side of the handgun that was exposed to the smoke and the steam. The slide is completely rusted. All of the bluing gone from this side compared to the side that was simply laying on the material. The small air gap here between the frame and the slide allowed the smoke to get in here and eat the bluing off of the frame. Interesting note here that the plastic grips on this handgun have not even begun to warp. They never got to the point where the plastic would actually warp and melt. Now here we have an extremely low-end handgun, what we used to call Saturday night specials. Even though it was nickel plated, the smoke and the steam has already begun to eat off the plating. Here again, the plastic grips have not warped. In a sheetrock line safe, these grips would have been burnt to ash. Here, this is very important here. This DVD was laying on the top, the second shelf in the safe, on top of the firebox. The plastic, the cheaper plastic, melted, but the DVD still didn't warp. But when I tried to play it, it would not play. Now the DVD on the right was inside of the firebox. Even though the plastic case, which remember is very low end plastic, had started to warp, this DVD would still play. No damage to the information on it at all. Very important to remember. That tells us that DVDs, media information, needs to go in the firebox. Even though our box was not a media box, I highly recommend a media box for media. Now, in the case of the paper inside the box, it would have made no difference. In this case, worst case scenario fire, it would have had steam damage and been slightly damp and had to dry out before you could use it again. Still, no major damage to paper, but it takes extra protection to protect DVDs media. Now here we have our time lock movements commonly used in bank vaults. They wind them up every day to prevent entry after hours. These time lock movements, Swiss movements, very high dollar movements. Very finely made movements. After the fire, all three of these movements would not work. Now a little blasted WD-40 and some air in a can, and 2 out of the 3 movements still worked. Now had this been a high dollar watch, they would have been sealed from the smoke and the steam by the watch case movement. Time lock movements are not sealed. They have the holes in them where they would insert the time lock keys. So these were basically, they were exposed to the smoke and the steam. It is interesting to note that 2 actually still operate. Had this been a high dollar watch with a glass, of course, face, then there would have been no damage. Now here we have an S&G lock that we had bolted to the back of the door inside the safe. This is purely for locksmith's safe technician testing. We wanted to see if the thermal relocker would fire. Now what that is even if the safe doesn't go through a hot fire, it can fire a thermal relocker. Even though you may still have a dial, you could dial the safe open or dial the combo in, but it would not open. This is the back cover of the lock here. Here we have the inside of the lock. What happens when the thermal fires, this is an internal relocker here. Once the thermal relocker fires, it allows this trigger inside of the lock to go from this position into this position. Now, when the combos dial in, the lock bolt will not retract. Had the thermal not fired, we could have retracted the lock bolt. In my opinion, this thermal relocker inside of a residential security container is not needed. What it does, generally, it makes the safe harder to open for a safe technician. So this is one option that I prefer not to add to my safe. Now here we have a phone book that was inside of the safe. If you'll note the black here along the edge, that's where the smoke and the steam touch. Mainly the smoke. This portion was covered by whatever happened to be sitting on top of it. This is the point I want to show you. Notice that these pages still turn freely. Now they're blackened on the edges by the smoke and the steam. That is what we always see. Now note this book. Now this is a different type paper. Notice the black edges. This book, the pages are stuck together severely. I had to tear these apart. They are locked together. They could still be separated, and the information on them, of course, would have survived. This slick finish on this particular paper caused them to stick together. Interesting note. Here is our paper that we had inside of the safe, simply on the shelf. Lots of steam damage to this paper. Note, this one happened to be on the shelf. Let's compare that to the one that was not on the shelf that happened to be in the firebox. This paper has now dried out to the point where it's easily reusable. Here we have the paper that was inside of the firebox. Notice that you do not see the smoke discoloration that you see on the paper on the left. No smoke discoloration here. Slight steam discoloration if you look closely. Interesting facts about fire and what happens to the contents.